Say hello in the chat if you're alive. Going to take you through some extra Donk stuff, go over the details that were perhaps rushed through on that video. First of all, actually, I'd like to talk about what is so special about the Donk. Why do we care? Why does anyone care about the Donk? Which is an interesting topic, in my opinion. You see, it's a sound that people gravitated to. It comes from a Dutch, the clubheads. They're called clubheads. They created this sound in the late 90s and people caught wind of it all over the world and fell in love with it. It's just an FM bass sound, much like many other FM bass sounds, but this one just has something about it. I don't know. It's got this twang to it. It kind of sounds very physical, you know? You hear a Donk and it's almost like you get this image of, well, a bamboo pipe, and that's what they called it, the bamboo bass, which is understandable. But being a Brit in the UK, we refer to it as Donk. Actually, I went to Australia about 20 years ago, and I was in a club where they were playing Melbourne Bounce, and I remember thinking, goodness me, I'm not so sure about this music. I mean, it wasn't to my taste, but do you know what? I find it very difficult to deny the power of the Donk itself. I absolutely love the sound, and I'd always been interested in creating it, and I'd tried various methods, but with varying degrees of satisfaction, let's say. But to me, the ultimate Donk, as I said in the Donk tutorial, is the clubheads Donk. There are many other types of Donk or donkey sounds, Donk-ish sounds, but none of them really, really do it for me the way that the clubheads Donk does, which, again, I'm not particularly, I mean, that's just not my scene. You know what I mean? In terms of listening to the music and buying the records and everything, it's not where my natural instincts go. If anything, I'd probably prefer some of the other genres that have nicked it from the clubheads, because that's what's happened historically, is that people have sampled Donks from actual clubheads records and used that because they couldn't make the sound using their equipment. In fact, let me see if I get my camera on. I tested the camera before and yeah, there it comes up really big, which is no good. I don't know if you're seeing that the way I think you are. Yeah, I'm not the expert of live streaming and all this stuff. Oh, I know what's going on with that. Well, never mind. It doesn't matter. Let's just roll without the camera. It's not that important. So this is the patch that I did as the first example, which it's not a real Donk in that respect, in the sense of it's not what you would use for a bounce track. But the principles for this are very much the foundation for the Donk, which is you have one operator just playing a sine wave. In fact, I'll play it on its own. I do have some effects on there. I might as well switch those off for now. So yeah, it's just a sine wave to begin with. I've got that fading out actually over time. These envelopes, I tell you what, these envelopes are very tricky on some of these FM synths. Like what is that? I mean, I'm turning this up, and when I get to the top, the shape just changes completely. I find that a little bit unintuitive sometimes, but fine, it is what it is. So this is for the level. There's like 2 stages in this. So if I can't remember how to do it now, bring this, you can get it to do some extra funky stuff, which, yeah, as I say, I find it a bit tricky, but we don't need that section. We only need the first section, which is, yeah, this thing. And these are the rates that control. So that's the rate for the release. Got that on 65. And this is the rate for the decay, the initial decay. If I turn that up, it gets faster, which is why the shape changes so dramatically. But if I turn that down, it gets really, really slow. Okay, so that's what the rate is. It's a little bit different from a usual ADSR if you're looking at this. By the way, I want to say something about software. There's no affiliation with any of the software. So if you see me using software That doesn't mean that I endorse it. It doesn't mean that I recommend it. Yes, it means I own it and therefore I use it. But you need to make your own software choices by yourself. There's no affiliate links. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't get this. If you're not sure, my advice, demo the software. That's what I always do. And then you'll know if it's right for you and your purposes. So don't think that I'm like saying, oh, you've got to get this. I'm not saying you've got to get anything. There's nothing on my list that is essential for you to get. You continue to use whatever software you want to. But using this, that's a basic sine wave with an envelope. And then what we do is feed in another operator, which is double the frequency, so double the pitch, so an octave higher. We can see it's called coarse on here. It's called ratio on some FM synths. This pitch is 2, whereas this pitch is 1, so we call that a ratio of 2 to 1. And that produces that very basic, well, that basically. And then, well, what would happen actually, I suppose, you might be wondering, what would happen if you didn't have a 2 to 1 ratio? Well, if it's slightly off, I mean, if it's 1 to 1, it's just a completely different type of sound altogether. It has a very different frequency profile, shall we say. I mean, a bit geeky, but I can tell you from experience listening to that, I can tell that that has odd and even harmonics, whereas when I move this up to 2, it only plays odd harmonics, which has a more hollow sound, which, as I said in the video, that's why you'll want a 2 to 1 ratio for hollow sounds like the donkeys. Hello to Don J, by the way. Donk, donk, donk. Hello to Steve Willow. Hello to Greg Evans. Gregor, nice one. And if you go higher with this, you just get different tonalities. Some of them might be nice, actually. I think that's quite good. But they might be useful in different ways, useful for different things. And it goes from sounding sort of, I mean, I've got to use subjective terms. It goes from sort of plasticky, woodeny sounds to sounding quite glassy and metallic. Hello to Chris. So yeah, the 2 to 1 is interesting. It's a special relationship in the sense that it produces a very clear, hollow sort of tone with those 2 sine waves. Okay, and then the next element is the click, which again, these envelopes, oh, actually, I should have mentioned the envelope on the second operator. So it's similar to what I did for the first one. It's just straight down, essentially, and the speed is controlled by this, the rate control. Now, what should that be on? Somewhere around 50-ish. Maybe between 50 and 60, let's say. Then there is, as I said, the click. Now, how I'm doing the click is another operator going into the second operator. So it's the third operator going into the second operator, which goes into the first operator. So basically, the first operator is the output. If that's off, there's no sound. The first operator always has to be on as we call that the carrier. And then these 2 are modulators. 2 is modulating 1, and then 3 is modulating 2. That's essentially how that works. So 3 doesn't modulate 1 directly, but because 3 modulates 2, then it affects the way that 2 modulates 1. Interesting? I don't know. Anyway, so it's got a very quick envelope. This is the quickest envelope setting. And if I turn this up really loud, you'll hear it start to click at the start. Very pronounced. You can change the tonality of that click very easily by moving the ratio. It's very subtle because it's such a quick burst of sound, but you will find that every number has a different tonality to it. And if you reduce the level of operator 3, that's reducing the amount that it modulates operator 2, therefore reducing its effect on the sound overall. And as I said, to turn that into a clubheads donk, as I said on my video yesterday, all I did was go into operator 2 and change that. Why is that not letting me change it? I'm in classic mode, I think, and I need to not be in classic mode. There's another mode. I forgot about that. Is that what I need to do? Extended? I can't remember. Parameters, classic, extended. Yeah, you've got to go into extended mode. I didn't mention that in my video, actually. I'm sort of assuming if you've got this software, then you'll know how to use it. But if you don't have it in extended mode, then it's locked to the properties of the DX7, the Yamaha DX7, which is the most famous, the one that put digital FM synthesis on the map. And that only has sine waves for the operator, so you can't change the waveform. But this has extended features that you can turn on or off like that. And then once you've got into the extended mode, you can, click this button and then I could choose, well, there's a variety of different operator shapes. Let's try a triangle. Yeah, I don't fancy it. Let's try some of the variants. That's not bad. That sounds like a good old school sound to me. Like old school techno, old school house. It's got a bit of a Mega Drive feel to it, but not really to my liking. Quite like that. It's decent, but it's not donkey. Let's go back to the sines. And it's sine variant 1, which is our magic waveform, the TX Wave 2. I'll just gradually increase that operator 2. And it's interesting because sometimes initially it doesn't sound like a donk, In fact, let's hear that in a more donk-friendly context. So I've got this 150 beats per minute sketch down here where I already have a donk pattern. So the things to tweak for the tonality of the donk are the level of the modulators. So the third, operator 3 is the modulator that's doing the click, and then operator 2 is the modulator that's making it sound twangy or pipey or whatever word you want to use. Gonty, bambooey. And so you can change the level of that, which changes the flavor. So obviously less is a bit more of a softer sound. And then more is more aggressive. Same with the click. I find the click around 2/3 sounds good for the sort of clubhead sort of sound. And then the other thing that we should look at tweaking, if you wanted to tweak it, is the rate of the decay on operator 2. If you go too slow, it just doesn't sound so hollow. If you go too fast, it sounds weird, sounds choked. So getting that speed just right is important. There's no kind of strong right or wrong with that. You just have to find where it works best for the track that you're working on. So that's a slower version of what I demonstrated on the main video. Let's do that with FM8. So this FM8 is the one that I used in the video specifically. In fact, I'll just reset that to the default preset. Oh, how do I do that? File. Yeah, new sound, of course. So here's FM8. There's our carrier operator. I used to wonder, why do people start with F? When it's A through F, why wouldn't you start through A? Well, sometimes it's just clearer that way to see what you're doing. It just looks tidier. I'll keep it simple. And that is the default on FM8 to start with F. So it's certainly faster from that perspective. So let's modulate F with E. Of course, we need E to be double the ratio of F. We also need release because that click on the end is driving me balmy. So a little bit of release on F. This is the envelope for F, so a little bit of release on that. We need more release on E because otherwise you get a weird effect on the end. The next thing we need to do with the E envelope is have it slide down. Now you may have noticed that the slope is curved on here. Why is that? I'm not really sure. Perhaps that is similar to the Yamaha DX7. I don't know. It seems to be a design choice. I have spent quite a bit of time with FM8 trying to make donks and failing. And at one point I got very, very deep into the detail of what you can do with envelopes. And in the end, I've decided actually it doesn't matter that much. Whether it's straight or whether it's curved, it doesn't make the hugest difference. The main thing that's important is the relative length, the rate of change over time. Because if you think about it, this is almost the same as a straight line if it only plays to here. So if it's longer, it's almost the same thing as it being a straight line anyway. Okay, now to get the click, we turn on operator D. Actually, you could feed that into E or you could feed it into F, I suppose. You could go directly to F. I think that's how the real patch does it, but we'll go over that in a moment. And that needs a much higher ratio, let's say 6. And it needs a very, very, very fast envelope. What have I done? I changed the wrong one to 6, didn't I? Okay, operator D. Let's go up to 6. And yeah, I want a very, very fast decay. So yeah, so you can have two operators modulate another. So these two are both modulators and this is the carrier. But you could also do it the way I did it in my video, which is second hand, if you see what I mean. So this modulates this, which is modulating this, which kind of makes sense as well because you get a little bit extra modulation power that way. So it sounds a bit harder going through E than it does going directly through F. And that's because we're modulating an operator that's already double the frequency. Hello to Alina. And then again, what I didn't show in my video is changing what happens when you change operator E, the middle one, to a TX Wave 2, which is literally on this list as TX Wave 2. Now, to me, that doesn't sound incredibly authentic. I've got to say, it doesn't sound the most club headsy. And this is no disrespect to FM8 or Native Instruments. I mean, it's a great synth. It's a classic synth. It's a popular synth. It just, perhaps, there's something about it which I can't put my finger on. I was more happy with the result that I got from OPS 7, although OPS 7 has its disadvantages as well. Goodness me, I'm going to sound like I'm slagging off all the software I use now. Not intentional. But the thing with OPS 7 is it's super, super accurate to the DX7, like to the point of emulating its flaws as well as its strengths. And what you'll find is there's a lot of aliasing. You can slightly improve that by changing the resampler mode and messing around with the DAC bits as well. Sometimes you can get some different sounds. But essentially, what I mean by aliasing is you get frequencies that aren't really supposed to be there playing in with the frequencies that are supposed to be there. It's like a nasty-ish sound that's added on top. When I say nasty-ish, I mean maybe it's desirable. Maybe in some cases it definitely would be desirable. And it's one of the things I most like about OPS 7. However, in this case, I can hear like a high frequency ringing. Let me show that with an EQ quickly. When I say show, I'm just going to, I don't know, boost it. Let's boost the high shelf. It's all that stuff. It's sort of crunchy stuff. And like weird wink it sounds. Those aren't really supposed to be there in theory. I mean, they are, as far as the plugin's concerned. I think they worked very, very hard to get those sounds in there because those are what makes it sound like a genuine Yamaha DX7, which is undeniable classic. But in terms of what the synth itself is setting out to do, the reason it creates those sounds as part of the patch is its errors. Essentially, those are digital artifacts. They're not really supposed to be there, theoretically. So one thing I like about FM8 is that it has less aliasing. Now, I may have dug into the menus and put it on high quality mode or something. Yeah, high resolution mode. I don't know if that is to do with the aliasing or not, actually, come to think of it. But I do know that FM8 sounds better when you render it at a higher sample rate, because I've experimented with that. So if you were, I don't know, if you were going to make a donk with FM8 to sample it, I'd suggest it's going to work best if you sample that at a super high sample rate, like 192 kilohertz, for example, rather than 44.1 kilohertz, which is what I'm running at now, and then downsample it. In other words, convert it down to the sample rate that you need it to be, or just drop it in your sampler at that rate and tune it up. Yeah, those are those options. And you might be thinking, well, why bother with those options when I kind of declassified how the club heads made their donk specifically with the Yamaha TX81Z? Well, the answer to that is before I figured out what they did, which is to find the patch that they edited, I was trying to figure it out for myself, and I didn't think that I would ever find the patch. That was something that happened much later. So I have to shout out to Craig Smith, who's been a massive help with this. He was the one who initially kind of gave me the donk bug and said, oh, you reckon you could clone the donk? I said, yeah, of course I could. He's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, definitely. He's like, there's a lot of people been after the donk sound, and people have got donk-ish sounds, but no one's actually had the clubheads donk. And I said, there must be. What about this producer and that producer? And he said, no, those have sampled the clubheads. Like, you've got to be joking me. You're telling me there's the bounce scene all over the world, and there's Scouse House, and there's obviously the Dutch side. You're telling me only one producer. There's the Russians as well, of course, the hard bass lot. You're telling me that the only ones who have figured out the donk is the originators, the clubheads. And he said, yeah, and people have tried. And we think that it's the TX81Z. That's what's been said in interviews. But people have bought TX81Zs and not been able to find the sound. I thought, wow, that's really intriguing because, yeah, I do love the sound, but it can't be that hard. I was thinking it must be something simple. Normally, these things are very simple, but the temptation is to try ever more complex things. That is almost something that you need to be disciplined about. You need to be disciplined about how complicated you're allowing the process to get. So I've seen tutorials where they're using loads of operators or lots of different waveform shapes, and then they're using filters and they're using distortion and they're modulating things and they're automating things, and then they've got heaps of effects on. And in the end, in my view, most of the time, that just ends up sounding like a mess, whereas the original Clubheads donk is a very pristine, clean, straightforward sound that intuitively, partly based on my synthesis experience, my feeling is that that should be something that's straightforward to do. But I tried all of the most obvious, basic, straightforward things and got nowhere. It took me about 2 hours to get remotely close. And within those 2 hours, I was starting to think, yeah, I can do this. I know I can do this. I'm close. I'm sniffing around in the right area. Now, I knew that the rumor was that the club heads used the TX81Z, and I looked at the specs of the TX81Z and that kind of thing. But, generally, when I'm aiming to recreate the sound of another producer, I'm not that concerned with what they did to get the sound that they got. I think most people can fall into a bit of a trap there where you're thinking, well, what did they use? What were the settings to get that particular sound? Which it's a logical and reasonable way to approach the problem. The trouble is, it's very, very flippin' difficult to get the answers. I mean, in this case, yes, we knew what the synth was pretty much, but just knowing that it's a TX81Z is not really useful. It's like, I'm sure I've used this analogy before, but my wife is amazing at all kinds of things, but one of them is cutting mangoes. That's on her CV, it should be anyway. And she's cut these mangoes into really nice shapes. And I've said to her, how on earth do you do that? And she says, with a knife. It's like, yeah, I get that. But you give me the same knife and there's no way I'm cutting that mango the way that she cuts it. It just doesn't happen. It's impossible because I don't have the skill. I don't know the angles. I don't know the speed. I just don't have the skill. Just knowing the tool is not enough to give you the same end result. What I'm really interested in, instead of how did they do it, is how can I do it? Very different question, because that opens up the possibility that I might do it a completely different way. Some people will say, yeah, but you've got to use the same tools if you want to get the same sound. And I understand that rationale, but it's not really true in an absolute way. It's really not, because as I've demonstrated, you can get very close using other tools, other methods. In fact, I'll show you something quite interesting. Well, I think it's interesting anyway. You'll find it interesting if you're into sound design and if you're into donks. A method that I used for many years, if I was aiming for a donkey sort of sound, is to take a square wave, MIDI myself up, and run the square wave through a bandpass filter. And I'm probably not the only one who's tried this. I'm probably far from the only one who's tried this. Let's get this fast though. Yeah, it's not really sounding how I was expecting. Yeah, more like that. It's not, that's not a club heads donk by any means. But it gets into that kind of a zone. You know what I'm saying? It gets close to the same sort of thing. But achieved via a totally different means. So there's obviously several ways to skin a feline. And sometimes you can get close enough doing things a completely different way. Other times you really, really can't. So I was just interested in how I could figure it out for myself and trying to stay disciplined in keeping the patch simple, because the temptation is always, well, if I had an extra operator, maybe I could get that extra tone that I'm missing. Or, oh, if I use distortion, maybe that will help. And the more layers of complexity that you add to it, the more lost in the weeds you become, because there becomes so many parameters that you could tweak that kind of depend on previous steps, saying that, if you had 6 operators and they're modulating each other, then one small change in the chain radically changes everything else. And so it becomes very, very difficult to make incremental steps towards your goal when the thing becomes very delicate. Now, that's the advantage of doing this the way that I did it, is it's not delicate. It's very easy to switch on or off the individual components. So, yeah, I mean, it looks simple now, but yeah, the trouble is when people like a sound, including myself, the temptation is always to think, well, since it's such a good sound and it sounds so much better than my basic attempts, there must be something difficult about it if I haven't got the sound. There must be something more to it. And judging by, as I say, a lot of the donk attempts that I've seen, the Clubheads donk attempts that I've seen, like tutorials and that kind of thing, where they haven't really captured the essence of the Clubheads donk, I think they have fallen for doing more and more things to try and get close to it. Hello to Helix Holmes. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the most important things is to remain disciplined and try to find the simplest way, the simplest solution. The simplest solutions as well tend to produce less artifacts. So remember I mentioned the aliasing on this. Well, it is what it is. But you also get aliasing with distortion in the digital domain. And that's unavoidable. Don't tell me about oversampling. It doesn't, I mean, it helps, but it doesn't help that much. And you get diminishing returns. So if you think, well, if 2 times oversampling makes it sound a little bit good, 4 times oversampling must sound twice as good. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. You get diminishing returns. So 8 times is less of a jump up from 4 times than 4 times is from 2 times, which is less of a jump up than 2 times is from 1 time. You get what I'm saying. So you get diminishing returns with oversampling, which is why I have plugins with 1 million times oversampling, which sounds ridiculous. I'm talking about Melder production plugins, and they still exhibit aliasing after, well, if you drive the distortion hard enough, of course. So yeah, more steps is more artifacts. You also have EQ artifacts. So I prefer not to EQ sounds if possible, just to keep it nice and clean. Same with compression. There's artifacts with compression as well. So simplicity generally gets you a better, purer, cleaner, clearer sound. And it's easier to manage, it's easier to put together, it's easier to remember, it's just cleaner, clearer, everything's nicer as far as I'm concerned. What other tweaks could we look at though for this basic setup? Well, the one that stands out to me is the idea of trying out different waveforms. So maybe for the carrier, what would that sound like? That's quite nice. I quite like that. But it's got more high frequency nonsense, you could call it, more aliasing. That's what that is, that high frequency kind of sound. That's aliasing. But let me put that with a kick. I'm going to have to turn it up, I think. I think in context, it's going to sound all right, is what I'm getting at. It's quite noisy, but once you add a track around it, it sounds quite decent. So there is definitely room to explore with this basic setup, which I'll be going into more of those explorations in my part 2 of the Donk tutorial video. So yeah, that was just changing the carrier from a sine to a parabol, which is essentially a saturated sine. Let's try some other ones. That's not so bad. Don't like that. Don't like that. I'm on the fence about that one. I think that could work potentially. I might need to bring down the modulation amount. In some cases, I think that could potentially work, but I'm not as enamored with it as I was with some of the others. Just no, that one's not for me. Soft tris, short, yeah. So some of these just get really gritty, really grungy, and you lose that sort of clean, the clean hollow sound, which is really the holy grail. So a lot of these are just not going to be useful whatsoever. I think that one's all right. I don't know. What do you reckon? Is that one okay? I'll play it back. Helix was saying in the comments, the crunchiness, it's the same effect of a bit crusher with less crunchiness. Yeah, the bit crusher's role essentially is to add aliasing frequencies. which is a digital artifact. And you can add it deliberately for crunch. There is a time when that works and it sounds good. But I think the Clubhead's Donk, despite being out of a reasonably high aliasing synth, which is the TX81Z, they've managed to make it sound quite clean, which is why, in fact, going back on my original video when I was doing this sound, this is the one from the video, this is not the one I tweaked today. I put a low pass, a gentle low pass on this to hide the aliasing a little bit, because I was thinking, yeah, it's like, I'll show you how it sounds raw with no effects. You get a little bit of that crunch in the top end, which is not necessarily noticeable when it's in the context of a track with, if it's competing with hi-hats and drum loops and whatnot. But what I did was I tilted the frequencies up to stop the sound from being muddy. And that really brought out the crunchy highs. So to counter that, I've low passed it a bit just to get it a bit cleaner. And in case you're interested in the rest, I just put a bit of reverb on there. This one's free, charm verb. And then I increased the stereo width a little bit to help the reverb stand out and to separate it from the dry sound, which is mono, a little bit. Back to FM8, I suppose. Let's not do the dink just yet. So you see, there's a few different ways we can mess with that. I wonder, well, I don't wonder because I already know, but what happens if you change the waveform of the carrier to a TX Wave 2? So I think that's quite acceptable as well. We are veering into experimental territory, but this is the beauty of having it synthesized instead of sampled, is hopefully people can start to use some new donks that are actually decent donks that can contend with the original Clubhead samples that people have been using for, goodness me, 30 odd years. Has it been that long? My maths is a bit off. 20 odd years. Still. And where we're going with this is I have this Serum. This is a Serum wavetable donk. And the beauty of that is I'm able to make the sub really solid, although I haven't done that in this particular project, and to give it a natural stereo width, which is good. I'm going to be covering that in part 2, the part 2 tutorial. These are expanding the stereo width. You might be wondering why so many? And I'll have to explain that on the next tutorial because it's just going to be boring to explain that now. And a little bit of reverb. Yeah, I had some major challenges translating the donk into Serum territory, but I really wanted to do it because I knew, again, that would open up more possibilities, more variations. And yeah, my goal, I suppose, is to open out the whole thing and have people produce more sounds that are inspired by the donk, but actually don't just sound like trying to be the donk and not quite making it. I think we can find ways to innovate and improve on the 25-year-old. Yeah, it's like 26, 27 years, isn't it? 1998. So what's that, like 26 years? Goodness me. So yeah, enough time ago. It is time for some new donks, I think. And hopefully with the tools that I'm providing, and in fact, I will give away some presets and I will give away wavetables as well for free at some stage. What I can't give away is the harp preset in my video, which I don't own. That's not legally mine to give away. Maybe you can make your own arrangements, but this is Hallion playing the harp preset. It's called, it looks like it says harp FM when it loads in Hallion, but the exact same patch when it loads in FM8 just says harp ... which I found unusual, but they are the exact same preset loaded from the exact same file on my disk. Yeah, harp ... FM versus harp ... I don't know why, but I'm hoping I'm giving you enough clues there should you wish to acquire it. you'll be able to figure out what that patch is. Again, the steps, in my video, I started by turning down the feedback, but what I should have started with, I think, in hindsight, is turning off operator 4, because then you hear the effect of the feedback coming down much more clearly. So let's turn off operator 4. That's turning on operator 4. That's soloing operator 4. Here we go. So instantly it sounds a bit more donkey. And then it's the feedback. So what the feedback is it means this operator, operator 1, which is the modulator, this is modulating itself. That's what the feedback means. So let's reduce that and have a listen. Someone's asking me, is Halion 7 freeware? No way. It's on sale, actually. But again, I don't have an affiliate link. I don't care if you get it or you don't. It really doesn't bother me, doesn't interest me. Your software choices are yours to make. Please demo the software. I have made my choices, you make yours. That's all I'll say on that. But let's turn down this feedback. Oh, always goes past 0. Yeah, so there's a difference between that and that. That doesn't sound quite as hollow, does it? As that. And then, so if you look at what's left, operator 1 was modulating operators 2, 3, and 4. Operator 4 is off, so we can turn that modulation off completely. Whoa, can we? Yes, we can. So that operator 4 is out of the picture now. So we've only got operators 2 and 3. Now, what are these actually doing? In case you're interested, how was the donk actually made? Well, operator 1 is the TX wave 2, although it's called wave 1 on here for some bizarro reason. Then operator 2 is also a TX wave 2, which is different from my design. It's different from the way that I did it. But this is the one with a very short envelope. So this is creating the click, and this is the body. And it's using a sine wave for the body. Although that looks like a funky sine wave if ever I did see one. I'm not sure that that's a plain Jane sine wave. I really don't know. But yes, it's just a matter of deciding how much modulation to get that donkey. You can definitely go too far. How would you describe that? It's almost like distortion, isn't it? Sounds crunchy as well. You get more aliasing the higher you go, because aliasing basically is an effect where the synth is trying to produce frequencies higher than the sample rate. And then those frequencies that it's trying to create manifest as ghost frequencies that are inharmonic artifacts. And yeah, the more you drive that, the more of those frequencies it's trying to create. Therefore, the more inharmonic artifacts you get. Helix says it's like a really bad laser. Yeah. When it's really high, you can hear it go. That's a bit better. And then, of course, you can affect the envelope time. So how would I do that, actually? Thinking about it. Oh, yes, it's here. And this has a straight line for the envelope. But again, I don't know for sure. Is this line actually linear? It's represented as linear in the software, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is actually linear. It may have a curvature to it. And how much does that curvature matter? I'm not sure. Shouts to Chris asking when's part 2. I'll let you know. That's all I'm going to say for now. Let's go through that same process with FM8. I think it's the more popular option. So this is the harp preset. For some reason, when you load this up in FM8, it loads up with a chorus delay, which doesn't happen on Halion 7. I don't know, they interpret the patch data slightly differently. Back to the ops. It's the same process. So we're going to turn off the one we don't need, which is F in this case. That's the equivalent of our operator 4. So I can take that out of there and that out of there. So now we have one operator, which is C as the modulator, and then 2 carriers, D and E. D is the very, very, very fast click, and E is the, well, it's the carrier, it's the main carrier, it's the body. I'm going to need to turn that up a lot because we're now super quiet. I'll just increase the input on here as well. And to get it back to that hollow sound, I need to reduce the feedback on operator C, which is it feeding back into itself. And again, we can tweak the envelopes. Notice that the envelope is represented by a curve on FM8, which again, that's why I'm suspicious about these envelopes, how they look visually versus what are they actually doing. You can't really be sure, but fine, whatever. Let's have a play with that envelope. Oh, I'm doing envelope E when I meant to do envelope C. Getting my operators mixed up. So I'd suggest to you, if you are synthesizing a donk, you should be tweaking the envelope to taste. But of course, I need to also look at the modulation amount. In other words, the level of the modulator. See that, because it aliases less than Halion 7, it has a very different sound when you get very high up. You don't get as much of that lasery effect, which in theory is less authentic, but I kind of like it. I gotta be honest. Now, interesting, if we look at what the operator waveform shapes are, again, E is the carrier, that's a sine wave. D, that's the click, that's the TX wave 2. And then the main modulator, operator C, is also a TX wave 2. So I could change that E, the E sine wave, to, say, the parabol, which I really liked. It's got more of a saturated sound to it, which I think sounds a bit nasty in isolation. But it's going to sound all right, I reckon, in the context with some drums. Let's tweak that. Let's tweak that. Yes, not bad, not bad, not bad. Let's go in on the envelope a bit. I always think the best way to get these sounds working is to make the pattern first and then tweak the fine details of like the decay rate and that kind of thing. When it's shorter, it sounds more UK to me. It sounds more like a UK bounce thing. And when it's longer, it sounds more Dutch. And I suppose that's the association of how it sounds coming out of the TX81Z live versus how it sounds when it's sampled. And, you know, when it's sampled, then when you play higher up the keys, typically, then the sound gets shorter. So there are records where they just keep the bass notes very short in order to, well, partly to overcome that, but also because of the bounce, because it's nice and bouncy when you have very short offbeats. I think as well, if I were to use FMA for a donk, I would be concerned about overlap between the bass and the kick drum, because that's going into kick drum territory. So this is one bar, right? That's overlapping the kick. So really, ideally, I would want some form of side chaining or something. But what you can do with this beauty is just draw in silences where the kicks should be. Which might not be the ultimate solution, but it works. It definitely works. What I would prefer, as I've alluded to, is to have the thing in Serum, because there's just a whole, not necessarily Serum, but any wavetable synth, I suppose. Serum is my top wavetable synth, I've got to admit, personally. But Again, use your own, choose your own. Right, questions. I'd like to hear this from a raw DX100. Does the DX100 have the TX Wave 2? I'm not sure. Maybe it does. Helix is saying this is where I start to enjoy phase rotation. I'm missing a word because my screen is so small. There's an icon in front of one of the words. Phase rotation. So yeah, that's a subject we're going to have to get into next time, I think. But there are other things that you can do with the phase of the operators. I think I'm going to cover that in the next video in part 2. What you can do is invert the phase. That's one easy thing you can do. So to go from that to that, so that gives you a slightly different texture, a slightly different tone. Let me put that back to a sine so it's a bit more. I might go into the editor for C and muck with the level since I've changed the polarity. I've inverted the waveform. Just basically means turn the waveform upside down on its head. As opposed to that. I mean, it's essentially the same sound, but you get different frequencies popping out, different harmonics. Hello to Adamski saying, no, the DX100 only has sine waves. Well, you can't do it only with sine waves. This is one of the issues. There are many decent FM synths on the market. One of my personal choices is the Mega Drive from Plogue, Chip Synth MD, but it only has sines. You can't change the waveform unless there's some funky way that I don't know about, some secret way, but I doubt it. I think I would know by now if there was, because I love this. It's a really lo-fi, crunchy, high aliasing FM synth, far more crunchy than OPS 7 because it emulates Sega Mega Drive, otherwise known as the Genesis. Very beautiful sounds out of that. I did attempt to make donks on that early on and then realized, actually, this is not going to work with just sine waves. So that's out of the question, unfortunately. With wavetables, you get more sub power potentially because the sub on this is not great. What I mean is, as these operators are modulated, the very lowest frequency isn't consistent in level. It starts quiet and gets louder over time, which you'd think is probably okay. But for today's ultra modern, ultra competitive dance genres, it's not ideal. What would be better is if that sub frequency, the lowest frequency, the fundamental frequency of each note, if that was super, super consistent, super, super loud. Not necessarily louder than it is now, but I mean playing at one consistent level that you're able to set relative to the other frequencies. You can do that with wavetables. Well, in certain wavetable synths, you cannot do that with this. I mean, there's some tweaks, there's some hacks, but they're messy. I don't like them. They're not as good as doing it the way that I'm suggesting, which is to use wavetables. Now, the challenge, this can be homework for anyone watching. If you can figure out how to get a basic donk in your FM synth of choice, perhaps FM8, perhaps OPS 7, perhaps something I haven't demonstrated. If you can get a donk sound you like, try to convert that to a wavetable. And not being rude, but good luck, because it's not straightforward. In fact, Serum, Mighty Serum, my number one synth, I would say. Serum can do FM synthesis. I have not made a satisfactory donk inside Serum using the FM synthesis. But that aside, so let's just put this one octave up and turn off the level and feed it through FM from B. So this will be our modulator and this will be our carrier. You get the idea. I mean, you can get some basic FM sounds, and there's nothing wrong with the FM in Serum. I'm not trying to diss Serum. I love Serum, but it doesn't sound the same as a Yamaha DX7. It doesn't sound as close as OPS 7. It doesn't even sound as close as FM8 in my view. But the other thing that's interesting in Serum is that it has this option to create a wavetable from the existing patch, right? So you do render OSC A warp. So the warp is this thing. So the warp in this case, I've chosen FM from B as the warp, meaning if I do render oscillator A warp, it should create a wavetable based on the FM synthesis between these two oscillators. But what happens is you get the mode is set to an FM type. You could use resample feature, unable to render warp. Basically, it won't let you. And I think I know why, because it's difficult to get it to sound good. Let's do resample. In fact, I need to change the modulators in order to do this. I don't want to go too deep into this, but I am going to cover this in more detail in a future video at some stage. Be patient. Let's do resample to oscillator A. So this is the other option for creating a wavetable. Now it does do it. It doesn't refuse. So I don't need the warp anymore because I now have a wavetable with the FM information in it, but it doesn't sound the same. In fact, I shouldn't have used that, should I? I should have used the envelope 2 as a modulator. Can you hear that clicking? It doesn't make smooth transitions from one frame to the next. Also, I know from experience that that sound that I created should only be odd harmonics, and there are even harmonics here. What are those? That is aliasing. Well, it might be partially the discontinuity between the frames causing that, but it's also aliasing. And no, doing the multis squarify, which takes out the even harmonics and leaves only the odd harmonics, that doesn't fix the situation. It addresses it somewhat slightly, but it's not a solution. It's not a workable solution. So building FM wavetables from FM patches is technically challenging, very technically challenging, not straightforward and not trivial. But once you've got it working, as I have, the world is your oyster. Just so you know, this patch is made up of a base, BASE foundation wavetable that I've created. And it says it's getting FM from sub, but that's not what you think it is. I can switch that off. There's no FM involved to create the basic donk. We've got the donk, and then the sub is on an envelope, a very, 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 very tight envelope, 24 milliseconds to be precise. It's for the click. We also have basically a copy of that operator. Sorry, it's not an operator anymore, is it? It's an oscillator, wavetable. We've got a copy of the wavetable in here where I've deleted the fundamental frequency, which means this version is just all the harmonics above the fundamental, which is why I was able to spread that with unison. It says it's random, but it's well, it looks like random, but it's memtrig, meaning it plays the same every time, even though it's a random distribution of voices. And then I've used a load of MSEDs to bring that up in level, because the level's quiet, because I don't want that interfering with my mid signal, the mono, which this can then fill out the middle. Then we have a mid oscillator, essentially, and a side oscillator, essentially, even though this is a little bit in the mid as well. Both modulated by the... Actually, no, this one isn't. I didn't modulate this with the sub. I don't know why. I thought I did. Because I could do that as well. I could do FM from sub on this. Yeah, maybe that's why I didn't do it. Oh, actually, it needs the envelope, doesn't it? Duh. Actually, I prefer having less attack in the side channel and more attack in the mid channel. Talking about mid and side, really going off topic. Just a reverb setting here. Very simple reverb settings if you're interested. That's how I did that. I'm done. That's all I've got to show. So thanks very much for coming along to my Donk Q&A live stream, where we've basically reenacted most of the steps from the original Donk tutorial video, and I've answered a few of your questions. The rest, I suppose, we'll have to wait for the Donk tutorial part 2.